All right, talking baseball with Mike Bacsik. I've missed getting the chance to do this, and maybe we'll bring the Hello Win Column podcast back in Zoom form. We'll have to wait and see. But for now, we're just having a baseball chat. We're going to get into some Rangers stuff. But, Mike, I know there's so much with this season in general, not necessarily Rangers specific, that is exciting and interesting. And I'm just curious, what are some of the things that are top of your mind just from a Major League Baseball standpoint?
Well, specifically Rangers standpoint, I'm kind of really interested in Willie Calhoun. I know it's only 60 games, but he had a great second half last year. He was the best hitter once Joey Gallo was hurt. So specifically Rangers, I'm really looking forward to see what Willie Calhoun can do in this 60-game season. From a Major League standpoint, I got to get out of my head that the Yankees are the best team in the East or the Dodgers are the best team in the West, because I've just seen too many beat writers tweet out last year in a 60-game stretch, and I'll just use this for example. The Rockies are a bad team. They were going to be a bad team in 162 games this year. But last year in a 60-game stretch, they were 37-23, which would win the division. So
if the best record in the league, possibly.
Yeah, so that's that. That's the Rockies, who we don't expect much of, could put together a 60-game stretch like they did last year where they were 37-23. They also put together a 60-game stretch where they were 16-44 in a 60-game stretch, which is why that they had one of the worst records in baseball last year. So for me, I look at teams and I go, look, Baltimore. I mean, there's a 99% chance Baltimore is a bad team. That's how bad I think they are. But there's that chance that they get off to a 7-3 start after 10 games. And now you're down to 50 games and they're in first place by a game or two. I'm not saying they would hold on, but I got to try to take my brain out of that. These teams are bad. These teams are good. These teams are somewhat eliminated. These teams have a chance to win the division, because in 60 games, a lot of crazy things can happen.
I'd say I would eliminate the Royals, the Marlins, the Tigers, the Orioles, and maybe that's it. And I would say everyone else has a legitimate shot. Not
the Mariners?
And the Mariners, yes. I'd eliminate the Mariners as well.
What about the Giants?
What's that?
What about the Giants?
You know, it's okay. So if they were not named the San Francisco Giants, then I think I would be like, if I looked at their roster, I'd be like, yeah, no, they're not. But because it's the Giants, I just have a tough time saying no. But yeah, probably. But but you're right. Everyone else, like, I mean, and the flip side of that is, and I don't know, I don't have a specific like numerical example top of my head from last year, but remember it was 2017 or 18 when the Dodgers, it was 2017. The Dodgers had this ridiculous run where they won 21 of 22 or something, and then they went in September and they lost like 10 straight games. If you lose 10 straight games at any time during this 60-game stretch, you're done. You are not making the playoffs. And so I guess my point is, you know, a team as talented as they were that particular season, I think they might have had the best record of the National League that year. They were capable of putting together a bad stretch. And so it is really interesting. I guess at the end of the day, every game is equal, but I do think that it is super important to not get off to a slow start. I don't think it is as important to get off to a fast start. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to turn down 12-3 through the first 15, but I think a slow start could wreck you. As long as you are still swimming after the first 10 to 15 games, I think you got a legitimate shot.
And I think that's great news for the Texas Rangers, because they aren't opening with the Dodgers and the Astros for their first 7 games. Now, maybe that would be a good thing if you were to beat up on them early, and they would be kind of, at least for the Astros and Athletics, your main competition, it looks like, for divisional favorites. But you do get Colorado and Arizona. I know at the end of your first 10 is at Oakland. But they do have a schedule, Jared, when you look at their first 10, where you could see like, hey, according to Las Vegas, whatever that means to you, is they would be somewhat the favorite maybe in 6 out of their first 10 games, which, you know, I'm not saying that it works out that way. But if you go 6-4, 7-3, and now you're down to 50 games and you're above 500, that's a great start.
All right, so from an NL West, AL West standpoint, we were talking about this earlier. You thought of something that is from a player standpoint that's really interesting. I just from a team standpoint for people to kind of familiarize themselves. So we mentioned the Giants. The Giants aren't good. They're not trying to be good this year. But they're one of those franchises. It's like totally tough to rule them out. But they could very well be the worst team in the NL West. The Rockies, they have that ability you kind of illustrated earlier. They've got a really good lineup with Arenado and Blackmon and Dahl and Trevor Story. Trevor Story might be the best shortstop in baseball. He's certainly top 3, maybe a future Ranger. That'd be kind of cool. And then you've got the Padres. The Padres are kind of, is this the year they're going to take a big step, or are they still a year away? But they've got the potential to be a really good team, and a lot of people don't know much about Dinelson Lamet's a starting pitcher for them who's really talented. And then you've got the Diamondbacks who, I don't know, the Diamondbacks, they could easily win that division in a 60-game season. I think they would probably compete but fall just short of a wild card spot in a 162-game season. And then the Dodgers who, it's the Dodgers or the Braves, 2 best teams in the National League. I don't think people necessarily from a roster standpoint put the Nationals there, but you could easily make it a 3-headed monster. So that's the NL West, and we know the AL West. But from a talent standpoint, there are going to be some fun players to watch.
Definitely. And I'm going to look at one position, and this is unbelievable, this position, what the Rangers are going to have to deal with their 9 opponents. And that's third base. Now, we know about Alex Bregman. That's our rival team, the Houston Astros. You got Matt Chapman, one of the best defensive third basemen, and he's great offensively, too, in Oakland. Now you have Anthony Rendon, who is a great third baseman now for L.A. On the other side, in the National League, you're going to have Nolan Arenado, arguably the best all-around third baseman in the game of baseball. You have Manny Machado, who just got over $300 million a year ago playing third base for the Padres. You have Turner, third baseman, who's he's a little bit downhill, as in he hit his prime and he looks like he's trending down a little bit, but still, over the last 3 or 4 years, I believe he's made the All-Star team a few times out of the last 2 or 3 years. So this third base position in the West is just loaded. It has to be, to me, Jared, the best position in all of baseball when we've done the divisions into we have the West, we have, the East, and we have the Central. I believe third base in the West is the strongest position out of all positions in baseball.
And then guys you didn't mention who don't necessarily fit that caliber but are still solid players. Eduardo Escobar for the Diamondbacks, and that's a good player. Like if he's your third baseman, you're not upset about that at all. But the fact that he's not mentioned kind of puts the talent in the West, the NL and AL West, kind of into perspective. It just curious if you had to rank the top 3. Oh, go ahead.
Well, the tough thing is, too, Jared, is when you play the Giants, there might not be a third base because it looks like Pablo Sandoval ate it.
All right, Andrew Baggerly. You're right.
Man, hey, he has to be 320.
Yeah, that was not a good look for him. And the thing is, they were counting on him or are counting on him to be somewhat of a part of their attack, I think, as a platoon guy at third. So we'll see how he does there. Hopefully he can get back in shape in time. I don't know. If you had to rank the top 3 third basemen in the AL NL West, how would you do it? Because I think you can make an argument for 3 different guys to be your number 1. And then there's another guy who 2 years ago I think would have been the number 1.
Okay, so this is very tough, honestly. I'm going to go with Alex Bregman as number 1. And it's tough because Nolan Arenado, the reason I'm not going to put him number 1 is his splits are so crazy when it comes to home and away. And I love Nolan Arenado. And I'm going to put him third on my list. And second, I'm going to put Anthony Rendon. So in the West, I would go Bregman, Rendon, Arenado, and I'm leaving off Chapman, which is very tough because I love Matt Chapman. I think he's one of the best third basemen in the game. But I'm leaving off one of the best third basemen in the game because I'm going to have three guys over him right now.
Yeah, that's really tough because I think I would take – I agree with you on Bregman. Bregman's my number one. I think number two, man. So here,
this is tough, isn't it?
Yeah, I wonder if I'm going to go with Rendon as my number four. And it's not based on last year, obviously, because if it's based on last year, then he's probably your number two. I do wonder about, and I mean this seriously, I do wonder about Bregman without any sort of assistance. But I tend to think it's more guys like Springer and Yuli Gurriel who perhaps have benefited more than a guy like Bregman. I'm going to put Rendon 4. I just wonder if what he did last year is something he can replicate. Plus, I think he's the weakest defensively out of Arenado, Chapman, and Rendon. I think he's probably right there with Bregman. So I'm going to go with Arenado second, Chapman third, Rendon 4. But if you ask me in 5 minutes, I might have, a totally different order. I mean, it is silly.
Isn't it interesting that we're not even including, like, Manny Machado for me is fifth. I'm assuming he's fifth for you. And, and he just got, the biggest contract for a third baseman, right? And it's, do you think part of it is the way he ended in LA, the playoff run where he really got bashed, and now he is in a place where it's very tough to put up great offensive numbers?
Yeah, I don't know. So he got off to such a weird start last year, and then he ended up getting better. I'm curious to see. I mean, this to me, I don't want to say it's a make or break year. I wouldn't say that it's a make or break year with Manny Machado. But the one thing that he didn't do once he got traded. So, like, I remember the year he got traded, one of the big stories with Manny Machado was, oh my gosh, he's drawing walks. Like, he's actually being patient. And I think his on-base percentage with Baltimore that year was like 390. Because I remember I think we were in Baltimore right before the All-Star break. So the last games he played as an Oriole were against the Rangers. And so I just remember, like, being so impressed with his numbers. And then he went to L.A., and all of a sudden he started becoming a free swinger again. And he was a free swinger last year in San Diego. So I don't know what to expect. So, again, it's not a make or break year. But I think this is a big year for at least me. Maybe I'm alone on this island. For me to kind of get a sense of who Manny Machado might be over the next couple of years. And I'll tell you what, right now, I would say, would I rather be the Padres with Manny Machado or any team that fell short in pursuing him? I'd rather be any team that fell short in pursuing him, just based on the way his first year in San Diego went.
Okay.
All right, so you brought something up a couple years ago, and it was on a Frisco broadcast, and we've talked about it since, but I remember my initial reaction to it was, no way. This is why we love Mike, because he's not afraid to have some crazy ideas, but no way. But the more and more I've thought about it, this is one of the more palatable of your crazy ideas, and I don't think it will ever be I don't think we'll ever see it put in place, but I think that we would benefit greatly if we did. And over this last 3-month period where we've been thinking about ways to improve baseball or things that could happen, changes that could be made, Mike, I got to tell you, I need to admit to you, this Two-Halve minor league type season just makes more and more sense to me. And I don't think that Major League Baseball will agree to it, but it makes too much sense. But I want you to kind of share why you think that splitting the season into two halves would help the game.
Well, I think that right now for the 60-game season, I think a lot of people are very interested. I think even the casual baseball fan, now obviously there's been no sport, but the casual baseball fan is like, I kind of watch here and there, is going to be more invested because everybody's in it, and it's going to be tough to be out of it. I know we talked about if you go on a 10-game losing streak, look, if you do start off 1-10 or 3-15, you're probably out. So if you're just invested in your team making the playoffs, you're going to be out. But most teams are going to be in. With about 25 games to go, your team, you could be 5 games out and behind 3 or 4 teams, which is going to be tough, but you're kind of in it. And then it would reset. If we had a full season after you played, in my scenario, something like 75 games in 75 games or something like that is, then it would reset. And then you would have come July 4th or July 10th, whenever you want to restart the second half, hey, now we start all over again. So as you get tired of baseball, your team all of a sudden becomes tied for first place again, and they have a chance to win the division in the second half. And for me, I get it. Is it true baseball and the 144, 162? No, but we got to start entertaining the fans more. And I think for us, the fans, and I'm not a player anymore, but for us, the fans, I think having 2 split seasons is the best way to go. And it could be really entertaining. And now all of a sudden, this interest that we have right now, Jared, in this 60-game season where we're saying a team like, our example, the Rockies, could win the division or have the best record in baseball in the 60 games, that craziness can happen. Also, it would probably take away a little bit of the tanking that is happening now in the game of baseball. And I get it. It's worked for the Cubs, champions. It's worked for the Astros. They also had a little bit of extra help. But teams that have tanked have gone on to get to the playoffs and even win the World Series. So other teams are looking at the Astros and the Cubs, for example, and going, let's do that. Let's quit for 4 years and not try, and see if after 4 years we can revitalize our farm system, get some really good young players at the major league level that can help us build again. Well, if we have shortened seasons where anything can happen, I think it would be a little bit tougher for general managers and owners to have meetings and go, let's try not to be good for 4 to 5 years.
So I look at it like this. You take every single day of the regular season, so it's like 185 or so days. Is your fan base engaged on this day? Well, on opening day, everyone gets a check. And maybe for the first few weeks, everyone gets a check. All right, now you start to separate yourselves. And you got the teams that are clearly in it and the teams that aren't. So like a team like the Tigers, first of all, their fan base is going into this year without any expectation of competing. So the first sign of being able to exit the room, they're going to exit the room. And so maybe that's May 15th. We'll be generous and say it's June 1st. That's still 4 months worth of baseball for them to be now not engaged. If you have that return point, like you talked about with the second half, not only are you going to get that fan base back, but that fan base is going to stay engaged longer in the first half because they know they've got something to look forward to. So now they might be 15 games out of a playoff spot June 1st and maybe in a two-half system mathematically eliminated. But I'm going to see, hey, how's Nico Goodrum playing in June? Is he building some momentum? Is he getting better? Is Spencer Torkelson getting called up? And, there's just more reason to be engaged. I think that a fan base will be engaged for a higher percentage of days in a two-half system than in the current setup. And it just 162 games is a lot. And maybe back in the 20s when there really wasn't a whole lot of activity to distract you, that works. But it doesn't work now. But the problem is, if we're being realistic, it's easy to say, well, let's just make it 82 games. Well, no, but that's not going to happen. The owners are now, if we learned anything for the last few months, the owners are not going to give an inch. So even going from 162 to 154, which I don't know that really makes a big difference anyway, but that's going to be tough to do. So you got to find a way to increase the engagement over the course of an entire season. And I think that does it perfectly. And the other thing too, Mike, is, you probably need to add a playoff team per league to make that work. And that's fine too, because again, no one's ever really complained about more playoff baseball or playoff basketball or playoff football. It's not like we're saying everyone gets in. We're not watering down the regular season. Fewer than half the teams would still get in, but you now, by adding another playoff team, allow for, again, greater engagement from fan bases. And I just think, to me, if you're going to have 162 games and games that are going to take 3 hours and change, this is what makes the most sense.
This was America's pastime and the greatest sport in the United States of America because there was really no television and your entertainment came through radio. And for 140 or 162 nights a year, you could turn on your radio and you could listen to a game. And that's what made it America's pastime. That's what made it so popular. It was really the only sports thing that could happen half of the time, pretty much, when you break down a year. I know it's less than half, but that was what made it America's pastime. You mentioned this. Now, with the entertainment that we have, with every gadget that we have and at our access, the quick entertainment that we can go to, people engage less in sports in like real time, where I'm just going to sit there and I'm going to watch 3 hours and 20 minutes of a baseball game. But if you can make it what we're talking about more engageable by, to me, it goes into more, but adding quicker innings, putting time limits on certain things, on pitches and getting in the batter's box. But if we make it more like our world is today, and it's not going back to no television, it's going to more access to more entertaining things. So we can't look at the game of baseball and say that, hey, it's great to play long games, which wasn't even the case back then, and that everybody will engage in 162. Everybody did when they didn't have television, or you only had 4 channels on your television and radio was your main entertainment.
All right, I want to ask you a couple Rangers questions quickly. So you mentioned Willie Calhoun. So Willie Calhoun, as of this conversation, is dealing with a tight right hip flexor, suffered last night in the scrimmage. This is Tuesday morning as we're speaking. By the time you consume this, we could have good news and Willie Calhoun's just fine, or maybe not so good news. Let's have 2 conversations here. One, let's say Willie Calhoun's totally healthy. How do you fit Nick Solak in, and how do you fit Isaiah Kiner-Falefa in? Because to me, Mike, with Izzy, if it was a 162-game season, I'd say, well, okay, I'm going to fall back on your major league production to date and say, all right, what you've done is you've earned yourself next man up status. So the minute we need to, someone goes down or whatever, you're in there. But because it's a 60-game season, it is awfully tough for me to deny a guy who, A, is probably my best defensive infielder, but B, been tearing the cover off the ball since March and is doing it now. If Willie Calhoun is going to miss some time, that makes that decision easier. We'll get to that. But if not, where do you fit Nick Solak, and where or do you fit in Isaiah Kiner-Falefa?
Well, I think some of the weaker positions right now for the Rangers going into the season are not in order, but it's center field, first base, and third base. And so when you look at those positions, do you look at first base and say, well, Ronald Guzman is so great defensively, we're going to put him there and we're going to bat our first baseman 8th or 9th and expect little production out of first base for these 60 games and in the future? Or do you look at it for me and go, Danny Santana and Nick Solak need to be in the lineup every day. One can play center field, and I have no clue, Jared, you're at practice and the inner squads, and one can play first base. And so that's the way I would look at it. And now Todd Frazier is an older guy, great numbers, been a former All-Star, and maybe Kiner-Falefa backs up second base, backs up third base, backs up shortstop, where he's getting in 3 to maybe even 4 times a week, giving a guy a day off in a situation. And that's how Kiner-Falefa gets his time. And maybe even, I don't know if Kiner-Falefa, how well he can play center field, or maybe you move Gallo to center field for a night and Kiner-Falefa to a corner position. But that's how I would do it. But you are getting to see Greg Bird, who I know very little of, except he was a former Yankee big-time prospect who could never stay healthy. And so he really hasn't played baseball. So I don't know what to put on Greg Bird and how good or not good he is.
Yeah, it's, I was a guy who was really intrigued by Greg Bird, and he homered yesterday, but it's just I don't know that he's done enough in a 60-game season to win that job, nor is Ronald Guzman. I would say that if Willie Calhoun's healthy, it's what you said. Either Santana or Solak play first, and then Izzy is kind of where you said he's kind of the 10th guy. An interesting thing with Izzy, we've asked about, well, what if Rugi gets off to a slow start? What if Elvis gets off to a slow start? What if we're 3 weeks in and Elvis has like a 650 OPS and is hitting like 250 and only hitting singles? You've got a guy in Izzy who was white hot for the previous, 2 separated months worth of exhibition games and is a better defensive player. I don't think they would make that move, but it's an interesting conversation. Now, if Willie Calhoun is going to miss some time, and I'm hoping that if he were to miss time, it wouldn't be significant, but let's say he's not ready opening day, then you can put Nick Solak in left. You've got then possibly Todd Frazier at first, and I'd say a Kiner Fluff at third, and now everyone's in there. That's not ideal. You don't want Willie Calhoun out. But the Rangers do have some decisions to make there, and it seems like with Todd Frazier playing first last night, they are moving forward with the consideration that their first baseman is not going to be Guzman or Bird. It might be, but they're at least open to the likelihood or the possibility that it isn't. Last thing, Mike, the rotation. Major League Baseball or MLB.com put out their top 10 rotations. I don't know if the Rangers have ever preseason had a top 10 rotation. No, I'm sure I'm not. I don't mean that as like a joke. Like they might maybe at some point, but I guess maybe the Cole Hamels, Yu Darvish season, maybe. But they're 7th. That's where they were ranked. And, I think you can make a case they could be higher. I think, you can make a case they could be lower. I want to ask you it's kind of a bench one, start one, cut one type question, except which of the big 3, or the guys we perceive to be the big 3, Lynn, Kluber, Minor, who are you most confident in? Who are you most concerned about? And who are you just totally unsure about? Because I think with Kluber, last year was such a, it's tough to know. And Minor and Lynn both had career years. And so I think it's fair to at least ask, can they repeat it? So most confident, least confident, and just totally unsure.
That's a great question. I'm going to go with most confident in Lance Lynn, that he can eat up innings, that he will go out there and give you 6 or 7 innings pretty much per start. But that's more valuable in a 162-game season. It's not as valuable in a 60-game season where if you're healthy and you make all your starts, you get 12 starts. You would hope a lot of guys can make 12 starts in this stretch and not really get that hurt because you're not having to grind. There's no grind to this season except you are playing 60 games in 66 days, but deal with it. I played a lot of minor league baseball. That would be a lot of off days in a minor league season. I'm most concerned about Corey Kluber, yet I think he has a chance to be comeback player of the year in the American League. So nothing against Mike Minor. It'll be interesting for me to see this. Last year, I don't want to say adversity, but when his name got put in trade rumors, he plummeted and really had a bad July and kind of said, and I love Mike Minor because Mike Minor is a guy who takes responsibility. But, I mean, he kind of said, I remember after having a good start in early August, speaking to Emily Jones after that start, I let the trade rumors get in my head, and now that it's gone and it's over with and it's flushed out, I'm good to go. I can concentrate on pitching again and not where I'm possibly going to be traded. So you ask great questions. So whatever Minor's category goes into, I put him in that category. So most concerned Kluber just because of the injury and what he can be. I'm going to go with Lance Lynn as my most reliable, yet I don't know the inning eating thing, if that's that great of a deal in a 12-game situation for starting pitchers. And then what is Minor's category?
Most unsure.
Okay.
Okay, you just one of these.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. I do think, and all 3 could end up being studs, but there is at least, if we want to look at this fairly, there's a fair question for each of them. But I'm really optimistic and excited to see this rotation play out. And then not to mention Lyles and Gibson is your 4 and 5. I mean, gosh, that they might be the best 4 and 5 the Rangers have had in, who knows how long. So, let's that's definitely a point of excitement for this season. All right, Mike, I'm looking forward to doing some more Rangers talks with you.
All right, buddy. Thanks. Get a haircut.
I'm about to make that phone call. Thank you very much.